Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Dar's Nights. I know many of you use these videos to relax or fall asleep, so before you drift off, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's get comfortable and begin. Story 1. The Smiling Man of Las Cruces. It was supposed to be a normal morning in Las Cruces, New Mexico, a quiet day at the bowling alley. But what walked in that day was not human. A man with a frozen smile, a mask that never blinked, and two cold, calculating eyes behind it. Within minutes, 4 people were shot execution style, 2 of them innocent children. But what's more terrifying? He vanished, leaving no trace, only that twisted, haunting smile. To this day, no one knows who he was, or what he was. Some say it was a man. Others say it was something far worse. This is the chilling story of the Smiling Man of Las Cruces. Las Cruces, New Mexico, was the kind of place where mornings passed quietly. In 1990, it was still the kind of town where most doors remained unlocked, and the streets felt safe under the soft sunlight of the desert. The day was February 10th, a Saturday, and the smell of breakfast tacos and fresh coffee lingered in the air. People were preparing for the weekend, kids were watching cartoons, and families were heading out to run errands or spend time together. Among those planning for a regular day was a small group of people inside the Las Cruces Bowl, a modest and friendly neighborhood bowling alley where the community often gathered. The alley was a hub of local activity, especially on weekends. It wasn't fancy, just a handful of lanes, arcade games, and a small snack bar, but it had a warmth to it. The kind that comes from routine, from laughter, from the scent of polished wood and popcorn machines. Behind the scenes that morning, 34-year-old Stephanie Senak, the manager, was preparing for another typical day. Her daughter, 12-year-old Melissa Repass, was there with her friend, 13-year-old Amy Hauser. They were just kids hanging out before the crowd came in, likely anticipating snacks, music, and a few games. In the back office, Stephanie was handling the usual tasks, balancing registers, reviewing receipts, and getting ready to unlock the doors. She wasn't alone. Her brother, Stephen Turan, had dropped by with his 2 young daughters, 6-year-old Paula and 2-year-old Valerie. He was planning to help out briefly before continuing with his day. There was no warning, no sign that anything was wrong. The clocks ticked steadily, the lights flickered on like any other morning, and the sound of shuffling papers and quiet conversation filled the space. Everything seemed normal. Then, just before 9 a.m., the door opened. Not with a crash or chaos, but with a deceptive stillness. A man entered, dressed in black and wearing a ski mask. He wasn't panicked. He didn't shout. He didn't move like someone in a rush. There was an eerie calmness about him, a quiet confidence that made his presence more chilling than if he had stormed in guns blazing. He wasn't supposed to be there, but he was. At first, it may have seemed like a robbery. The man forced Stephanie and the others into the office area, demanding money. The safe was opened. Cash was handed over. But even then, something felt off. There was no urgency. No yelling. The man wasn't there for a quick grab and run. He moved with the kind of focus that suggested this had been planned, perhaps rehearsed. Every motion had a purpose. Every glance was sharp. And then, there was the smile. Witnesses would later recall that beneath the ski mask, the most terrifying detail wasn't the gun or the commands. It was the strange, permanent grin on the man's face. Whether it was part of the mask or his actual expression, no one could forget that unchanging smile. That grin, twisted and cold, lingered in the memory of everyone who survived. It wasn't just a facial expression, it was something unnatural, something that didn't belong in the middle of an early morning gathering of families and children. It was a smile that seemed to mock the fear around it. It didn't flinch when children cried. It didn't fade when the money was handed over. It stayed, like it had been carved there. There were no security guards. No alarms that blared. No crowds to intervene. Just a handful of innocent people trapped in a place that had always felt safe. What happened next would unfold with brutal speed. Within minutes, lives were changed forever. 4 people would be gunned down, execution style. 2 of them would be children. Others would be left barely clinging to life. The walls of the bowling alley office, once filled with simple paperwork and planning, would soon be covered in blood and bullet holes. But before the nightmare fully unfolded, it was just a regular morning. A slow, quiet Saturday in a small town. People were going about their business. Kids were laughing. A mother was preparing for work. A brother was helping out. Friends were hanging out before lunch. That's what makes what happened all the more horrifying. There was no warning, no omen, no reason to suspect that something evil was about to walk through that door. In Las Cruces, the morning of February 10th began like any other. But by the time the sun rose high in the sky, a heavy shadow had already fallen over the town. And in the years that followed, no one would forget how ordinary everything had seemed, right up until the moment it wasn't. He didn't kick down the door. He didn't scream or fire shots into the ceiling. He didn't wear the chaos that criminals usually bring with them. Instead, he moved with an unsettling calm, almost like he belonged there. Like he'd done it before. The man who stepped into the Las Cruces Bowl just before 9 a.m. was dressed in dark clothing, wearing a ski mask pulled tightly over his head. He held a .22 caliber pistol in one hand, and a second firearm tucked somewhere unseen. But it wasn't the weapons that chilled the air. It was something far less physical, something far more disturbing. Beneath the mask, according to those who survived, was a frozen, twisted smile. They called him the Smiling Man for a reason. Whether it was part of the mask or a visible sliver of his real face, the expression was described the same way, a grin that never moved, never faltered. It wasn't a grin of happiness or nervousness. It was cold, detached, mocking, a smile without soul, a smile that seemed to stretch wider the more terrified his victims became. Even in the haze of trauma and panic, it was that grin that etched itself permanently into memory. He moved quickly but never rushed. He ordered the victims, Stephanie Senak, her daughter Melissa, Melissa's friend Amy Hauser, and the others, into the office at the back of the building. There were no negotiations, no bargaining. He didn't ask for names or make threats laced with emotion. He simply commanded, and they obeyed. Perhaps it was the mask that made him so terrifying. Perhaps it was the weapons. But for those who saw him, it was something more primal. It was the way he looked at them without blinking. The way he seemed completely void of empathy. He didn't appear angry or agitated. He looked satisfied. Inside the small office, the victims were told to lie on the floor. Money was demanded. Stephanie complied. She opened the safe and handed over what cash she could access, roughly $4,000. The man didn't flinch at the amount. He didn't argue or seem disappointed. He took the money without a word and placed it calmly into a bag. But robbery, it would turn out, wasn't the end goal. That became horrifyingly clear within moments. Without hesitation, the man began to shoot. He shot each victim one by one, aiming at the head. He didn't rush, didn't shout, didn't panic. He executed them methodically, like it was a routine. Like he'd done it before. Each shot echoed off the narrow office walls. The silence between gunshots was even louder. And through it all, that mask, with its chilling, fixed grin, remained pointed toward the ground where his victims lay bleeding. Some were hit multiple times. Stephanie, Melissa, Amy, and Stephen Turan were all shot. Stephen's two young daughters, Paula and Valerie, were gunned down as well. Children, ages 6 and 2, caught in a moment of incomprehensible evil. No mercy. No hesitation. The man turned on them as easily as he had the adults. He didn't flinch when they cried or screamed. He didn't pause when they begged. If anything, the smile seemed to stretch even further. And then, he disappeared. Within minutes, he was gone. He walked out the same way he came in. No one saw a getaway car. No one saw him run. It was as if the man simply vanished into the morning light. By the time the police arrived, he had melted into the city, leaving behind bodies, blood, and an entire community gripped by disbelief. How could someone do something so horrific in broad daylight, so calmly, and then disappear without a trace? Melissa, despite being shot 5 times, somehow survived. Bleeding and slipping in and out of consciousness, the 12-year-old managed to dial 911. Her voice was weak and trembling as she begged for help, describing what had just happened. It was her bravery that ensured first responders made it there as fast as they did. But the horror had already settled. Amy Hauser, Melissa's friend, was dead. Stephen Turan and both his young daughters were gone. The bowling alley, once filled with joy and noise, had become a tomb of silence and trauma. To this day, law enforcement has no definitive idea who the masked gunman was. Sketches were drawn based on survivor accounts. Leads trickled in. None led anywhere. And yet, in all of the witness descriptions, one detail always stood out. Not the clothes, not the voice, not the getaway plan, but the smile. That cursed, lifeless, unfading smile. It wasn't just a detail. It was a symbol. A mark of something far darker than a robbery or a murder. Something deeper, something inhuman. As if whatever that man was, he wasn't just there to kill. He was there to enjoy it. To watch the fear. To bathe in the chaos he created. And he wanted them to remember him, not his name, not his voice, but his smile. In the hours following the massacre, Las Cruces was no longer the quiet, unassuming town it had been that morning. Police sealed off the bowling alley, ambulances rushed the wounded to the hospital, and detectives scrambled to piece together the fragments of something that didn't make sense. From the beginning, the case seemed both horrifying and strange. Something out of place, something that didn't follow the usual patterns of crime. Investigators were met with more questions than answers, and each step they took forward only uncovered more confusion. The initial theory was simple. It was a robbery gone wrong. But that theory began to unravel almost immediately. The cash that had been stolen amounted to a few $1,000s, but the killer's behavior didn't match that of someone desperate for money. He had taken the money without panic. He had shown no signs of stress, no anger, no disorganization. There had been no getaway vehicle reported. No witnesses in the parking lot. And most disturbingly, there was no clear reason for the execution-style killings. He already had the money. Why stay longer? Why shoot everyone so deliberately? The crime scene was meticulously examined. Ballistics experts traced the bullets to a .22 caliber pistol. The shooter had also used a second weapon, a .32 caliber. Two guns, both fired with precision, and both indicating the shooter knew how to use them. There were no fingerprints, no hair, no discarded items. It was as if the man had left no trace of himself behind. The office, once filled with life, now served as a silent witness to a level of violence that felt orchestrated rather than impulsive. Melissa's 911 call provided one of the only voices from the inside. Her description was vivid despite her injuries. A man in dark clothing. A ski mask. Calm demeanor. She remembered the mask's strange shape and how it seemed to stretch in a fixed grin. Others who survived offered similar descriptions. The man's height. His calmness. His voice, low and emotionless. But nothing that could identify him directly. Composite sketches were made and circulated across the state. Leads poured in. None panned out. Witnesses from nearby businesses claimed they hadn't seen anyone suspicious. No strange vehicles. No loud noises. Just silence. The FBI was brought in, treating the case as a potential serial crime due to the execution style. Profilers tried to map out what kind of person could commit such an act. Theories ranged from a disgruntled former employee to a contract killer to a thrill-seeking psychopath. But every theory hit a dead end. No motive emerged. No enemies. No gang connections. No pattern that connected the victims. The families were ordinary. The bowling alley had no recent incidents. No one had received threats. No warnings. Just that single horrifying moment, surgically executed and then vanished into thin air. As days turned into weeks and weeks into years, the trail grew cold. Rewards were offered. Billboards were raised. Investigative specials aired on local and national television. Each time, it seemed like someone would come forward. Each time, hope flickered. But nothing ever led to a name, an arrest, or even a credible suspect. The case became a haunting mystery. How a man could kill so many, leave no trace, and walk away unnoticed in daylight. Then there was the question no one wanted to ask out loud but couldn't ignore. What if it wasn't just a man? The smile haunted people. It became a symbol of something unnatural. Eyewitnesses spoke of how it never changed, how it seemed to stretch in a way that wasn't quite right. Some claimed it wasn't part of the mask at all, that it was his actual face, twisted into something inhuman. Theories began to sprout from the fringe, whispers about demonic possession, about entities that feed on fear. Paranormal researchers became fascinated with the case. They pointed to the precision of the crime, the lack of emotion, and the disappearance as signs of something beyond human. Skeptics scoffed, but the community couldn't shake the unease. It didn't feel like a regular crime. It felt like a curse. Years later, detectives revisiting the case noted how bizarrely clean the whole event was. No DNA. No witnesses beyond the survivors. No connection to any known criminal pattern. The shooter hadn't even disguised his voice or mannerisms much, yet he left behind no identity. Even surveillance footage from nearby businesses failed to capture him entering or leaving. The security systems at the bowling alley were not operational at the time. Just another layer of unsettling coincidence. For the families of the victims, time stood still. The pain didn't fade. The questions only multiplied. Every year, vigils were held. Candles were lit. Names were read aloud. And behind every tear shed, there was the same unspeakable question. Who smiled as he murdered innocent children, and why? The smiling man became something larger than a suspect. He became a shadow, a symbol of a case that made no logical sense. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a phantom etched into Las Cruces history, not because of what he took, but because of what he left behind. Silence. Fear. And that smile, burned into memory, forever unanswered. As time crept forward and the scent of justice faded into dust, the case of the smiling man began to drift from official records into something far more chilling. People still remembered the facts, the date, the place, the senseless deaths, but soon the facts weren't enough. What remained in the cracks of memory were the whispers. Rumors that the killer wasn't just a man at all. That the case had been abandoned not because of a lack of evidence, but because the truth was too disturbing to face. Locals spoke in hushed tones about what they believed really happened that day. It was no longer just about murder. It was about something that didn't belong in our world. There were whispers among the survivors, especially the younger ones, that something was off about the man beyond the ski mask. They didn't just remember his face, or rather, the grotesque smile they said didn't move. They remembered the way the air changed when he walked in. How time seemed to slow down. One child claimed the man didn't walk like a person, he glided. Another said he had eyes so dark they looked like holes in his head. And while such memories could easily be dismissed as trauma-distorted visions, others began echoing similar sentiments without ever having talked to each other. It wasn't the facts they remembered. It was the feeling. A presence, thick and heavy, like drowning in fear. A scent that wasn't quite smoke, not quite sulfur. Something that stayed with them, even years later. The paranormal explanations were mocked publicly but quietly explored. One private investigator claimed to have interviewed a retired detective who said he saw something impossible in the crime scene photos, a faint silhouette in the reflection of a metal cabinet. He said the figure's head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its grin stretched beyond what skin should allow. When questioned later, the detective denied making the statement. But the rumor had already taken hold. A psychic who reached out to the families years later insisted that the bowling alley was never just a business. That something had been buried beneath it decades before. She described it as a point of hunger, a spiritual scar where pain and evil could enter easily. She said the killer wasn't a man, but a shell, something being used. Her claims were never taken seriously by authorities, but her words began spreading in certain circles. Online forums picked up the theory and dissected every detail of the crime scene looking for proof. Why did the security system fail that day? Why was there no footage, no trace, no exit route? Why did the killer never return, never strike again, never even appear on any radar, in any database? Some said the answer lay in the children. That the killer was drawn to them specifically, not for any worldly reason, but because of something they possessed, an energy, an innocence, a light. Demonic folklore often referenced entities that fed off the energy of fear, especially that of children. Could the killer have been something summoned, intentionally or not, by a buildup of pain in that space? Others suggested he was a collector of souls. That the reason he lingered after the robbery, the reason he executed so coldly, was because the act itself was a ritual. More chilling were the reports of people who claimed to have seen the smiling man elsewhere, years after the murders. A man in a ski mask with an unnatural grin spotted watching children at a playground in Texas. A nearly identical figure seen loitering near an abandoned school in Arizona. None of these sightings could be confirmed, but they were numerous enough to raise eyebrows. Each account described the same eerie calm, the same fixed smile, the same black eyes. The sightings never led to any harm, but they always left people shaken, as if something had just passed through their lives and barely missed them. Then there were the dreams. Survivors and others connected to the case started reporting recurring nightmares. In each one, they found themselves back in the bowling alley, but it wasn't quite the same. The air was thicker. The lights flickered unnaturally. They couldn't move. And in the shadows stood the smiling man, watching, never speaking, just smiling. When they woke up, many reported waking at exactly 3:17 a.m., the same time the police received the first call from the scene. These were not isolated incidents. Therapists reported multiple patients having similar nightmares, despite never speaking to one another. As the story passed into legend, it took on the shape of folklore. Children dared each other to say his name 3 times in a mirror. Locals avoided the now-closed bowling alley, even after it was repurposed into a retail space. Employees there claimed to hear laughter in the back rooms, doors opening on their own, a smell of burning rubber or plastic in places where no machinery existed. One worker claimed she quit after seeing a man in the security monitors who wasn't in the building. He was just standing there, smiling. What began as a tragedy slowly turned into something unexplainable, something that lived in the space between nightmare and reality. The smiling man wasn't just a killer anymore. He was something worse, a presence that had opened a door to fear that no one could close again. And perhaps the reason he was never caught was simple. You can't arrest something that was never human to begin with. As the years turned into decades, the investigation into the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre faded into the background of American crime history, yet it never quite disappeared. It sat like an ember in the ashes, no longer flaming, but far from cold. Officially, it remained unsolved. Unofficially, it haunted every detective who had ever touched the case. From evidence that inexplicably vanished to witnesses who suddenly stopped cooperating, the mystery surrounding the smiling man was less about what was known and more about what seemed impossible to prove. Despite the disturbing details, the original investigation had started with a sense of urgency. Sketches were drawn. Press conferences were held. Tips poured in from every direction. Law enforcement interviewed hundreds of potential witnesses. Yet, as if swallowed by a black hole, all leads quickly died. Fingerprints lifted from the scene matched no one in any database. The weapon was never found. The masked man, despite being seen by multiple people in broad daylight, left no trail behind. Not a single surveillance image. Not a single credit card transaction. Not a single confirmed sighting. It was as if the man had appeared for that one moment of carnage and then vanished from existence. It wasn't long before the case ran into bureaucratic quicksand. Jurisdictional disputes between city, county, and federal investigators led to delays. Promising evidence sat unprocessed for weeks due to a backlog. Even a few officers began to privately wonder if they were dealing with something that couldn't be caught through normal channels. One retired officer would later confess that after a year on the case, he stopped believing they were looking for a man at all. He said what bothered him most wasn't what they found, but what they didn't. No shoe prints, no escape route, no stolen vehicle reported in the area. Just silence. More disturbing were the files that couldn't be accounted for. Years later, when journalists attempted to re-examine the evidence, they discovered that key portions of the case file were missing. Entire witness transcripts gone. Photographs misplaced. Physical evidence logged but no longer present in storage. When questioned, the departments involved blamed miscommunication, transitions in staff, and deteriorating storage systems. But even these explanations felt inadequate. The omissions weren't random. They were surgical, as if someone or something had quietly erased the trail. Public interest in the case experienced a resurgence every few years. Each time, amateur sleuths, true crime bloggers, and podcasters would try to piece together the fragments. They mapped the bowling alley, recreated the crime in digital models, interviewed aging witnesses. Some even reached out to psychic mediums and paranormal investigators for insight. But nothing stuck. Nothing progressed. It was like chasing smoke. Every theory collapsed under scrutiny. Every clue ended in shadows. Some began to speculate that the failure to solve the case wasn't just incompetence. That maybe the authorities had seen something in the investigation, something they chose not to reveal. Maybe the evidence wasn't missing, but hidden, locked away because it didn't fit the narrative of a solvable crime. Some even whispered that law enforcement had come closer to the truth than they admitted and that the truth was too horrifying to share. Perhaps it wasn't just about robbery. Perhaps it wasn't even about murder. Perhaps it was about something ancient that had resurfaced in the most unexpected place, a small-town bowling alley on a quiet morning. The families of the victims never gave up. They pushed for answers year after year, holding memorials, posting billboards, begging for public support. But with each passing year, their pleas were met with a growing wall of indifference. People moved on. The world changed. New tragedies took the spotlight. Yet for those left behind, the pain remained exactly the same. Time didn't heal. It only deepened the wound. Especially knowing the person, or entity, responsible had never been caught. Never faced justice. Never even been named. By the 20-year anniversary, local officials admitted the case had gone cold. Not closed, but dormant. Still, whispers continued to swirl around the case files stored deep in the archives. Files some said were cursed. A young records clerk once claimed she quit after handling documents from the case, insisting that after just a week of organizing those files, her life spiraled, nightmares, unexplained illnesses, and a car accident that nearly killed her. She believed she had brought something home with her. Something that had followed her from the paper to the real world. To this day, the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre remains one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in American history. Not just because of the brutality, or the innocence of the victims, or the lack of answers, but because it feels unfinished. There's a sense, even now, that the smiling man could return. That he might appear somewhere else, wearing a different mask, in a different city, with that same unnatural grin. The case isn't just cold. It's dormant, waiting, watching, like a story that never truly ended. In the absence of resolution, speculation thrives. The Las Cruces bowling alley massacre has become more than an unsolved crime. It has grown into a dark myth. Over the years, dozens of theories have emerged, each attempting to explain what happened that morning in 1990. Some are grounded in criminology and psychology, while others drift into the paranormal and even demonic. What makes the case so enduring isn't just its horror, but how it refuses to be explained by logic alone. The most conventional theory suggests that the smiling man was a career criminal, a drifter or contract killer who came in for a quick robbery, but something went wrong. This idea hinges on the methodical approach of the attacker, the use of gloves, and the clear effort to leave no forensic evidence. Supporters of this theory argue that the eerie smile wasn't supernatural. It was a calculated psychological tactic meant to paralyze victims with fear. Cold, efficient, and brutal, the killer may have simply vanished into the underworld, perhaps later killed or imprisoned under a different identity. It's the cleanest theory, but it doesn't explain why nothing ever surfaced. No similar crimes, no matching ballistics, no deathbed confessions. Just silence. A second theory suggests an inside job. Some believe the shooter knew the layout of the bowling alley too well to be a stranger. The timing was perfect, and he appeared to know when and where the victims would be most vulnerable. There were even rumors that one of the victims had been involved in shady dealings, possibly with drug money being laundered through local businesses. According to this line of thinking, the robbery was a cover-up for a targeted execution, and the children were simply tragic collateral damage. The smile, in this case, was not about madness, it was personal. A message. But this theory too has flaws. No financial irregularities were ever proven, and the theory relies heavily on speculation with little verifiable evidence. Then there's the theory that refuses to fade, despite how unbelievable it sounds. The smiling man wasn't human. This idea took root when retired investigators, off the record, admitted that some aspects of the case never made sense. The killer seemed to glide rather than walk, his reactions unervingly fast, his expression never changing even under the stress of murder. Eyewitnesses described the smile as frozen, inhuman, even plastic. Some wondered whether it was a mask, or something far worse. Theories began to emerge that the attacker was a demon in human form, or an entity wearing the skin of a man. Supporters of the paranormal angle often point to the missing files and corrupted evidence as signs of something greater than human interference. They claim that whatever force was behind the murders didn't want to be found, and manipulated reality itself to stay hidden. Others believe the bowling alley was built on cursed land, that the crime was a ritualistic offering, or that the smiling man was an omen of death, sent to collect souls, not money. These beliefs are hard to prove, but just as hard to completely dismiss when every logical avenue has led to nothing. Another disturbing possibility centers on MKUltra and mind control experiments. A few conspiracy theorists tie the case to government black operations, suggesting the killer could have been a programmed assassin, a Manchurian candidate-type figure activated to perform a violent act, then immediately deactivated or erased. This theory is fueled by the emotionless nature of the crime, the precision of the killings, and the blank, detached expression the shooter maintained. It seems outlandish, but documents released from real government experiments during the Cold War lend a sliver of plausibility to the idea that humans can be turned into killers with no memory of their actions. A more psychological theory labels the smiling man as a rare kind of sociopath, someone capable of total emotional detachment during violence. His smile, in this interpretation, was a reflex, a display of dominance or inner pleasure. Criminal profilers who support this view often compare the Las Cruces killer to individuals like Israel Keyes or Richard Ramirez, people who could kill without conscience and leave behind almost no trace. The only problem: even these serial killers left some kind of footprint. The smiling man didn't. Through all the theories, one truth remains: the case continues to resist closure. Each possible explanation only seems to create more questions. Why kill the children? Why leave witnesses alive? Why not take more money if robbery was the goal? Why no forensic trail? And most haunting of all, why the smile? The internet has become the new ground zero for debate. Reddit threads, YouTube documentaries, and deep dive podcasts try to connect the dots, each building on the last. The smiling man has become a digital urban legend, part crime, part ghost story. Some believe he's still out there, watching. Others think he was never real in the first place, but a mask worn by something we were never meant to understand. In the end, the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre remains a mirror. It reflects not only our fear of violence, but our deeper fear of the unknowable. Whether the smiling man was a killer, a demon, or a myth, his grin lives on. Not just in police sketches or aging news clips, but in the quiet terror of a case that defies reason, logic, and time itself. End of Story 1. Story 2. They appear on desolate roads with skin pale as moonlight and eyes darker than death itself. No pupils. No whites. Just black, empty voids. And when they speak, it's always the same chilling phrase: "Let us in, or we'll follow you home." This isn't a ghost story. It's a disturbing pattern repeating across America, especially along Colorado's Highway 285. Truckers vanish, engines stall, and children long thought dead seem to return. But they're not asking for help. They're hunting for a way back in. Are the black-eyed children just a legend, or are they the spirits of murdered kids, trapped between worlds and desperate to be seen again? Tonight, we follow one man's encounter that changed everything, and explore the terrifying truth behind the whispers in the dark. Stretching across the rugged heart of Colorado, Highway 285 cuts through mountain passes and lonely plains, a lifeline between quiet towns and forgotten backroads. For most, it's just another highway, scenic during the day and unervingly empty at night. But among long-haul truckers and late-night drivers, it carries a reputation far more sinister. There are whispers, traded over static-filled radios and roadside diner booths, of strange figures seen in the dark. Small figures. Children. Standing alone at the edge of the asphalt, pale-skinned and motionless, their eyes concealed by the night, until you get too close. They call them the black-eyed children. And nowhere are the sightings more persistent than along Highway 285. The reports follow a pattern that's eerily consistent, regardless of the storyteller. Drivers recall seeing 2 or 3 kids, often near old rest stops, closed gas stations, or emergency pull-offs. They're always described the same way: unseasonably dressed, sometimes barefoot, and unervingly calm. They don't wave. They don't cry. They just stand there, waiting. Some drivers report that the children approach their vehicles without hesitation, sometimes tapping gently on the glass. Others say the kids simply appear on the road ahead, forcing drivers to swerve, then vanish without a trace. The true terror begins when the driver stops. The children speak softly, with voices that sound just slightly off, flat, emotionless, or strangely formal. They always ask to be let in. Into the car. Into the truck. Into the home. The phrase varies slightly, but the message is always the same: let us in. And then, there are the eyes. Witnesses describe the moment they realize something is terribly wrong as a kind of psychic rupture. The kids' gaze lingers just a little too long. Their heads tilt in unnatural synchronization. And when their faces are fully visible, the truth hits: eyes like bottomless pits, pitch black from corner to corner. No whites. No irises. Just void. These aren't the hallucinations of sleep-deprived drivers. The stories come from people who've been on the road for years: seasoned truckers, military veterans, even law enforcement. The accounts are scattered across decades, but what makes them chilling is their uniformity. The pale skin, the cold speech, the black eyes, the sudden vanishing. None of it aligns with any rational explanation, but there's too much consistency for simple coincidence. Over time, Highway 285 has become a hotbed for these reports, particularly near the stretch between Fairplay and Saguache. Locals refer to it as the silence zone, not just for the lack of radio signal, but for the strange quiet that seems to hang in the air, an unnatural stillness that settles over the road like a shroud. Many believe something lingers there, not bound by time or weather, waiting for the right moment to be seen. Or worse, remembered. The stories often end with strange aftermaths. Drivers report nightmares that persist for weeks, children crying in empty hallways, doors slowly creaking open in their homes, electronics flickering without cause. One common thread is a creeping sense of being watched, especially between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m. Pets behave oddly, refusing to enter certain rooms. Radios emit garbled voices, always just out of discernible range. Sometimes, family members mention seeing a child at the foot of the bed, just standing there. But the black-eyed children don't always vanish after the encounter. Some say if you refuse to let them in, they follow you. Not physically, but spiritually. They become a presence in your life, knocking when no one's there, whispering your name in the dark, appearing in dreams that feel more like memories. The encounters leave a mark that no amount of distance or denial seems to erase. A few researchers have tried to connect these sightings to historical patterns of missing children in the region. Colorado's rural counties have dozens of unsolved disappearances dating back to the early 1900s. Some theorize that these entities are the restless souls of abducted or murdered children, trapped in the liminal space between death and recognition, desperately trying to make contact. But others are convinced these aren't spirits at all. The more occult-minded believe the black-eyed children are something older than ghosts. Entities that mimic innocence as a form of predation. Creatures that wear the form of children, not because they are, but because they know we're more likely to let our guard down. According to these theories, the act of letting them in isn't just literal, it's an invitation. A binding. A surrender of control that cannot be undone. No one can agree on what exactly the black-eyed children are, but one thing remains certain: their presence is not benign. Every story ends in fear, confusion, or disappearance. And those who speak of them, years later, still do so with trembling voices and hollow stares. Highway 285 remains open, its black ribbon winding through the heart of Colorado. Cars still pass through the silence zone, drivers unaware that they might not be alone. That something ancient, cold, and patient may be watching from the trees or standing just beyond the next bend. Small figures, still and silent, waiting for someone kind enough, or foolish enough, to stop and ask them if they need a ride. What gives urban legends their power isn't just the fear they instill. It's the pattern that connects them to something disturbingly real. In the case of the black-eyed children along Highway 285, that pattern leads straight into the archives of missing persons reports, cold case files, and unexplained disappearances stretching back decades. There's a reason the legend has taken root in this particular region. The terrain may be vast and desolate, but the darkness it hides feels coordinated, almost intelligent in its cruelty. South-central Colorado has always carried a reputation for strange vanishings. Long before the term black-eyed children entered the public lexicon, Stories circulated about children disappearing without a trace from rural homes and roadside areas near the highway. In some cases, there were signs of struggle: an overturned bicycle, a dropped backpack, a shoe found in a field. But more often than not, the children were just gone. No footprints, no witnesses, no leads. Authorities blamed wildlife, abductions, even children running away, but something never quite added up. The terrain made it difficult to imagine someone surviving long without supplies, especially at high altitudes or in winter. And yet, despite extensive search efforts, most of these children were never found. Not alive, not dead, just vanished. Several of these cases occurred within a 10-mile radius of the same highway corridor where the black-eyed children are now most frequently reported. Skeptics dismiss the connection as coincidence, but to those who've studied the reports in detail, the symmetry is impossible to ignore. The timing, the geography, the descriptions of the children seen by drivers decades later, matching the approximate ages, genders, and even clothing styles of the ones who disappeared. It's not just a modern phenomenon. Digging deeper into regional folklore reveals tales from indigenous tribes about ghost children who would appear during snowstorms, asking to be led to shelter. Those who helped them were never seen again. The names and symbols differ, but the essence of the stories remains eerily familiar: an invitation wrapped in innocence, followed by disappearance or madness. The fear intensifies when one considers the psychological consistency among witnesses. Most of those who encounter the black-eyed children describe an overwhelming sense of dread that sets in even before the eyes are visible. It's as if something primal, buried deep within the human brain, recognizes the wrongness in them long before logic does. And that reaction, instinctive and almost animalistic, is reported too frequently to be ignored. Notably, there are recurring details in the aftermath of encounters. Witnesses often fall ill in the days following. Fatigue, migraines, nosebleeds, night terrors. One man reported losing track of time repeatedly, waking up in unfamiliar locations with no memory of how he got there. Another said his dog, previously gentle and obedient, turned aggressive and paranoid, barking at corners, refusing to go near doorways. Electronics malfunction. Lights flicker. Radios pick up whispers or static patterns that repeat at the same time every night. Some even report symbols drawn in condensation on mirrors or windows, always appearing in pairs. The more the stories are shared, the more the details converge. This collective recall, some researchers believe, points to something deeper than coincidence. One disturbing theory suggests that these encounters are not isolated, but cumulative. That each time a story is told, each time someone reads about the black-eyed children, it spreads awareness of them, and with that awareness, access. Like an echo growing louder. A door slowly opening. A dark invitation being answered. Several paranormal investigators have attempted to track the movements of these entities, only to discover what feels like deliberate misdirection. Trail cameras malfunction. GPS data becomes corrupted. Cell phones die abruptly. One team claimed to have captured faint audio recordings of a child's voice whispering, "Please," over and over, only to have the device overheat and shut down minutes later. When they tried to retrieve the file, it had been wiped clean. The children themselves never change. Always 2 or 3. Always pale, always cold, always with voices devoid of emotion. Some believe the number matters, that 3 represents a perversion of the familial unit, a dark mockery of siblings, or perhaps a symbol of something ritualistic. It's the consistency that haunts researchers the most. Real hallucinations are chaotic, unique to the individual. But these stories, they align with unnerving precision, regardless of the witness's background, age, or mental state. This uniformity has given rise to another theory, that the black-eyed children are not spirits or monsters, but a type of entity that operates like a parasite, feeding on attention, on memory, on fear, and that perhaps their true goal isn't simply to scare or even harm, but to be known, to spread, to infest the minds of those who hear their story. So, when a trucker pulls over on a lonely stretch of 285 and sees 2 pale figures waiting in the dark, the question isn't just who, or what, they are. The deeper terror lies in the possibility that these children have always been here, waiting to be seen again. And once seen, they never leave. They simply wait for the next one. There's a reason Highway 285 has gained such a sinister reputation among long-haul drivers, especially those who frequent the stretch between Antonito and Center, Colorado. Unlike other rural routes, this one carries an unspoken rule, a rule passed from driver to driver, never written, but etched deep into the culture of those who rely on this path. The rule is simple: if you see children on the road after dark, don't stop. No matter how young they look, no matter how desperate they seem, keep driving. At first glance, it sounds heartless. How could anyone ignore a child in the cold, alone on a deserted road? But those who've driven this stretch for years know that not every figure you see is real, and not every cry for help is meant to be answered. There's a chilling logic to this mindset, born from repetition. Too many cases where drivers swore they saw someone, only to find no one there upon turning back. Too many travelers who disappeared without explanation after pulling over. Too many dashcams that glitched into static at just the wrong moment. What's most disturbing is the way these rules are enforced not by law or superstition, but by collective experience. Veteran truckers share stories with a sense of gravity usually reserved for funeral services. One man recounts hearing laughter from his trailer even though he was alone. Another claims to have glimpsed a child-sized figure keeping pace with his rig at 60 miles per hour, on foot. These stories don't vary much in content, only in tone. Some are told with anger, others with quiet resignation, a few with fear so raw it borders on guilt. The phenomenon isn't confined to the road itself. Some drivers claim that the children appear near rest stops, truck plazas, and diners along the highway. They don't always approach, they don't need to. Sometimes, they just stand near the tree line, staring, silent, still, not moving an inch, not blinking, not speaking unless spoken to. And even then, all they ask is to be let in. There's a psychological aspect to this presence that gnaws at those who've seen them. The children do not behave like typical lost kids. There's no panic in their movements, no tears, no urgency. They appear as if placed there, deliberately and precisely, like props in a macabre performance. And when they speak, it's always in a tone that's flat, void of inflection, rhythm, or warmth. Just the same phrase again and again, "Let us in." Over the years, the reports have only increased. It isn't just truckers anymore. Locals living near the highway speak of children knocking on doors at odd hours. Campers have packed up in the middle of the night after hearing footsteps circling their tents, accompanied by soft whispers and the sound of two voices asking to come inside. The sightings follow a seasonal rhythm, peaking in the winter months. No one knows why, but the most accepted theory is simple and grim. The cold makes the living more vulnerable, and the dead more restless. There's also a strange electronic component to these encounters. People have reported car radios turning on by themselves, cycling through stations before settling on static. Others hear a soft knocking sound through their Bluetooth speakers. A few have described phone screens flickering with shadowy childlike silhouettes for a split second before shutting off completely. These occurrences aren't always accompanied by a visual sighting, but they're considered a warning, a prelude. Research into the phenomenon reveals even more unsettling patterns. Every few years, someone attempts to map out the sightings. The resulting images are rarely consistent, until they're overlaid on top of each other. Then, a rough perimeter forms, almost like a containment zone, centered along Highway 285 but spreading further each year. The area seems to expand in quiet increments, unnoticed by most. But to those paying attention, it feels like something is growing, spreading. Authorities never acknowledge these stories officially. When questioned, police chalk it up to folklore, exhaustion, or the effects of long, isolated drives. But some officers admit, off the record, that even they have received reports too strange to dismiss. One former state trooper once claimed that he'd responded to 5 missing persons reports along 285 in a single winter, and none of the cases had any physical evidence. No tire tracks. No footprints. Just one abandoned vehicle and a lingering chill in the air. Others believe the black-eyed children are not real in the traditional sense, but real enough that they represent a psychic scar on the land, a kind of spiritual radiation left behind by trauma. If so, then each sighting may be less about the children themselves and more about the sorrow they echo. The highway, then, becomes not a path but a wound, one that never quite closes, always festering beneath the asphalt. Whatever the truth, The result is the same. People vanish. Others are haunted. And no one who sees the children walks away unchanged. Those who speak of their experience are often met with disbelief, but those who've truly seen them never try to prove anything. They just repeat the rule, quietly and with a kind of dread that only comes from surviving something unspeakable. If you see them, don't stop. Don't answer. Don't look back. Among the most disturbing aspects of the black-eyed children phenomenon along Highway 285 is the growing connection between their appearances and actual missing children cases. What once began as an urban legend rooted in eerie roadside sightings has now started to overlap with real-world tragedies. Disappearances that remain unsolved, timelines that align too closely, and details that defy coincidence. The whispers about these links are quiet, often suppressed, but they persist in the shadows of investigation files and among families still waiting for closure. Take the case of Adrian Cortez, a 9-year-old who vanished from his family's camper outside Alamosa in 1998. According to his parents, Adrian had stepped outside briefly to retrieve his flashlight and never came back. A massive search followed, but no footprints, clothing, or signs of struggle were ever found. What investigators did find, however, was a set of handprints, small, childlike, and oily, on the exterior of the camper door. No other prints were present. Not even Adrian's. It was as if something or someone had touched the door and vanished without a trace. Another troubling report involves 2 teenage cousins, Luke and Brandon, who went missing near the town of Saguache in 2005. The last known footage of them was captured by a gas station camera showing them joking and buying snacks for a road trip. Hours later, their vehicle was found idling on the side of Highway 285, doors locked, keys still in the ignition, and both boys gone. In the back seat were 2 open bags of chips and a child's drawing that neither boy was known to have made. The sketch, drawn in red ink, showed 2 stick figures with pitch-black circles where the eyes should be, and a third figure, tall and vague, looming behind them. These cases aren't the only ones. Dozens of families have come forward with stories that begin normally, camping trips, long drives, family vacations, and end in total confusion and heartbreak. Each story carries peculiar similarities: unexplained electronic interference before the disappearance, strange feelings of being watched, and occasionally, the mention of children no one else could identify. Some survivors described seeing a pair of kids watching them from a distance in the days leading up to the event. Others heard knocks on their RVs late at night, only to find nothing outside. What makes these cases especially chilling is that the black-eyed children described by those who saw them sometimes bear an uncanny resemblance to the very children who went missing years prior. Not in clothing or behavior, but in facial structure, posture, and subtle details like a birthmark or chipped tooth. As though whatever these entities are, they don't just mimic children, they become them. The theory that these black-eyed figures could be the distorted remains of the lost has haunted many families, leaving them with a chilling dilemma. Are their children truly gone, or have they been absorbed into something unnatural? Paranormal investigators who've taken an interest in Highway 285 often point to this pattern as evidence that these entities may be harvesting the souls or essences of children. Some speculate that they are not children at all, but something ancient using their forms to interact with the living, feeding off pity, curiosity, or fear. Others believe the black-eyed children are the result of trauma itself, lost souls of murdered or forgotten kids, unable to pass on and reshaped by grief and isolation into these uncanny forms. This theory gains traction when considered alongside old Native American legends tied to the San Luis Valley. Some tribes spoke of shadow children, spirits of the young who were taken before their time and wandered the earth looking for warmth, shelter, and acknowledgement. These spirits, it was said, would take the form of whatever frightened others most, because only then would someone finally notice them. While modern skeptics dismiss these stories as folklore, the eerie consistency between ancient tales and contemporary encounters has made many reevaluate what they once called myth. Local law enforcement, for their part, avoids addressing these connections publicly. Yet leaked memos and anonymous tips from former officers hint at a pattern being quietly tracked behind closed doors. One chilling report detailed how, after a rash of sightings, a deputy discovered a tree near the road decorated with missing child flyers from various decades, none of which had been placed there by family members or volunteers. It was as if someone, or something, had collected the names, the faces, and left them behind as a grim tribute. The black-eyed children are no longer just whispers of folklore, they've become a sinister presence tied directly to real-world pain. The longer the stories are ignored, the more they seem to grow, feeding on neglect and silence. For the families who never found answers, the idea that their children might still be out there is both a curse and a desperate hope. But if these entities truly are the stolen souls of the missing, reshaped into something no longer human, then perhaps letting them into your vehicle, your home, your thoughts, is not a gift of safety, but an invitation to join them. The deeper one looks into the missing persons reports tied to Highway 285, the clearer the pattern becomes. Faces vanish from the real world and reappear as pale, silent phantoms, knocking quietly, always just outside. And the most terrifying possibility is not that they want to hurt you. It's that they want to take you with them, so you'll never be alone again. The long, desolate stretch of Highway 285 cuts through Colorado's high desert with a kind of emptiness that gnaws at the mind. It's a route driven mostly by truckers, loners, and the occasional family passing through the forgotten parts of the state. Among the tight-knit trucking community, stories are currency, and fear is shared in whispered warnings. But when it comes to the black-eyed children, there's an unusual silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from disbelief, but from a fear so deep it demands denial. Many long-haul drivers have passed through that stretch at night, only to emerge shaken and unwilling to ever speak of what they experienced. These are men and women hardened by solitude, mechanical breakdowns in the dead of night, and encounters with the truly strange. Yet the few who have come forward about the black-eyed children all share the same haunted expression, as if something followed them beyond the road. Some have quit the profession altogether. Others simply change their routes to avoid Highway 285, even if it costs them time and money. One retired trucker, whose story was later posted anonymously in a forum for over-the-road drivers, described a strange pattern of sightings along mile markers 150 to 178. According to his post, these locations are where radios cut to static for no reason, where headlights flicker despite full batteries, and where cell signals vanish even during clear weather. These are also the places where drivers have spotted figures on the roadside. Small figures, standing motionless, always in pairs, always pale, and always with eyes that reflected nothing at all. Despite the forum's reputation for urban legends and trucker folklore, what makes this account hard to dismiss is how quickly the comments section filled with similar experiences. Dozens of users, all under different aliases, began sharing eerily consistent accounts. Engine trouble near the same mile markers. Encounters with children asking for rides. Dreams that followed them for days afterward. Some even claimed that after these incidents, their GPS devices behaved erratically, pointing them toward nowhere or drawing spirals on the map screen. The silence surrounding the black-eyed children isn't just about fear. It's about consequences. One anonymous driver claimed that after telling his dispatcher about the strange kids who tried to climb onto his rig while he was parked at a rest stop, he was fired within the week. The official reason? Mental instability, flagged during a surprise evaluation. Others have claimed that trucking companies know something but refuse to acknowledge it publicly. There's talk of NDAs, insurance liability concerns, and even unspoken agreements with local law enforcement to keep any official records clean. Rest stops along Highway 285, particularly the older ones with no attendants, have become hotspots for strange occurrences. Drivers report shadowy figures visible just beyond the tree line, electrical malfunctions in trucks that are otherwise in perfect condition, and sometimes the lingering feeling that someone, or something, is inside the cab with them, even when locked. Dogs traveling with their owners have been known to bark violently at empty spaces. Sleep-deprived or not, too many people report the same events for it to be dismissed as coincidence. Psychologists might argue that the loneliness of long-haul driving and the repetition of open roads cause hallucinations or waking dreams. But such explanations fail to account for the consistency across decades and different drivers. These aren't tales spun in bars over drinks. They're reluctant confessions made in hushed tones, often after the witnesses have left the profession altogether. There's an almost sacred understanding among truckers. If you see the children, you do not stop, no matter how convincing they sound. No matter how cold or scared they appear. Because they're not scared. They're pretending. The whispers have grown darker in recent years. Some claim that those who stop for the black-eyed children don't just vanish, they come back wrong. Changed. Quieter. Distracted. They forget routes they've driven 100 times. They lose track of time, sometimes arriving hours ahead or behind schedule with no memory of the missing hours. A few start talking to themselves over the CB radio at odd times, mumbling names that no one recognizes. Others grow obsessed with the highway, driving it compulsively, unable to sleep until they've passed the same stretch again. And again. And again. Perhaps most disturbing are the claims from drivers who say the children followed them. Not just down the road, but into their homes. Into their dreams. Into the white noise of late-night static. One post detailed how a driver moved 4 states away, only to find a pair of small muddy footprints outside his apartment window weeks later. No children lived in the building. No one had been outside that night. The tracks ended at his window, and nowhere else. The legend of the black-eyed children of Highway 285 persists not because of dramatic events, but because of what they leave behind. A subtle rot. A splinter in the mind. An unease that doesn't go away, even in daylight. Among truckers, fear isn't worn openly. It's buried deep, behind a hardened face and a steering wheel gripped a little tighter when passing through the silent stretches of highway. But if you listen closely in the diners and late-night fuel stops just beyond that cursed road, you might hear someone say it, "Don't stop for the kids. They're not real. But they will be, if you let them in." There's something about silence that holds weight on Highway 285. It lingers long after the engine has stopped, after the night has settled in, and after the stars blink out one by one behind shifting clouds. The stories about the black-eyed children don't truly end. They only change shape, moving from mouth to mouth, from post to post, from a quiet thought at 3 a.m. to a cold certainty that something is watching from the roadside. The danger isn't just in encountering them. It's in remembering them. Witnesses say it starts with a dream, always vague at first. A hallway with no end. A knock at a door that never opens. The feeling that someone small is standing behind you, just out of view. People wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, unable to describe why they feel dread so deeply. Over time, the dreams become clearer. Pale faces. Black, bottomless eyes. Whispered pleas that don't sound like children at all. A voice that doesn't echo in the room but crawls through the walls of the mind. Many who've had these dreams report seeing the children again, not on the highway, but in their own lives. At the edge of a supermarket parking lot. Across the street late at night. Standing at the bottom of a staircase in an apartment complex. They don't move. They just stare. But when approached or confronted, they vanish. Not by walking away, but as if they were never there to begin with. This leads many to question their sanity, to wonder if they're dreaming during the day too, or if the waking world is slowly bending under something darker. The children always appear in pairs. Never more, never less. Their symmetry is unnatural. Their stillness unnatural. They rarely speak unless spoken to, and when they do, it's always the same message in different forms: "Let us in." "We can't come in unless you say it's okay." "You have to invite us." The words sound innocent, almost polite. But no one who hears them ever feels at ease. The voices are small, but hollow, as if something ancient is wearing the mask of a child. The requests are simple, but laced with an unspoken threat. An invitation isn't a choice. It's a test. There are theories. Many believe these entities are echoes of murdered children, souls never laid to rest, tethered to the road where their lives ended too early. Some go further, claiming they aren't children at all, but parasites from another realm using lost innocence as camouflage. A handful of folklorists link them to ancient spirits from Native American lore, while others call them demons, shapeshifters, or spiritual hitchhikers that need human permission to cross fully into our world. But no matter the theory, the rule remains constant. If you acknowledge them, they stay longer. If you invite them in, they never leave. Not all victims survive their visits. Some disappear entirely. Their vehicles are found idling at rest stops, belongings untouched, food still warm in the seat beside them. Others suffer mental breakdowns. They rant about children that no one else can see, beg not to be left alone at night, and eventually retreat into complete silence, unresponsive to family or friends. A few victims, strangely enough, leave behind drawings. Always 2 figures, holding hands. No eyes, just black holes. And always, somewhere in the drawing, a house. Their house. In rare cases, law enforcement has become involved. One incident involved a woman in Taos reporting 2 children staring through her patio door every night for a week. Security cameras showed nothing. When she vanished, Investigators found dozens of crayon drawings lining the walls of her garage, drawings she never remembered making. Another case involved a state trooper whose dashcam footage showed him pulling over at mile marker 162. The footage ends with his door opening. His radio picked up a final phrase, "They're here." His cruiser was found abandoned 3 days later. He was never recovered. Attempts to explain these events through science or psychology always fall short. Sleep paralysis, highway hypnosis, shared delusions, none account for the physical evidence left behind. The fact that those who haven't met the children still dream of them. Or the unexplainable radio static that seems to spike just before an encounter. It's almost as if the road remembers. As if the very stretch of asphalt between certain mile markers is cursed, a liminal space where rules bend and the veil between realities thins. There is no official documentation of the black-eyed children. No state agency has ever recognized them. Yet among truckers, late-night radio hosts, and those who've driven Highway 285 alone under a full moon, their presence is accepted without question. Even local residents in nearby towns, quiet desert communities untouched by time, refuse to talk about the children. They'll change the subject, lower their voices, look toward the hills as if expecting something to appear. What makes the legend truly terrifying is that it doesn't end when the truck is parked or the journey ends. The black-eyed children don't stay on the highway. If you see them, they remember you. If you speak to them, they find you. If you let them in, into your vehicle, your home, your mind, then you become part of the silence. Part of the whisper that warns others. Part of the growing number of people who know the truth but can never say it aloud. Because once you've seen them, your silence isn't a choice. It's a sentence. And somewhere, just beyond the corner of your vision, they're still waiting. Pale. Motionless. Eyes like pits of oblivion. 2 of them. Always 2. Whispering the same words through a smile too calm to be human. Let us in, or we'll follow you home. End of Story 2. Story 3. They thought Ed Gein's horror ended in 1957. They were wrong. His house was torn down. His crimes documented. 2 confirmed murders. A grotesque collection of skin and bones. But what if that was only the surface? What if the real truth still lies buried beneath the cracked earth of his cursed farm? Decades later, a group of thrill-seeking urban explorers enter the ruins of Plainfield's most infamous land, only to discover that something is still alive beneath the floorboards. Something that never stopped scratching. The name Ed Gein continues to echo through the dark corners of American crime history, not just for the grotesque nature of his crimes, but for the chilling legacy he left behind. In the quiet town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, Gein was seen for years as an odd but harmless man, a recluse with a vacant stare, a man who lived alone on a decaying farm after the death of his domineering mother. But what lay beneath that simple exterior would soon become the stuff of nightmares, inspiring decades of horror in fiction and film alike. Gein's crimes came to light in 1957 after the disappearance of local hardware store owner Bernice Wardens. When police entered Gein's farmhouse, they uncovered a horror show unlike anything they had ever seen. Human skulls used as bowls. Chairs upholstered with human skin. A belt made of nipples. A box of noses. The decapitated body of Wardens, found hanging upside down in the shed, gutted like a deer. And perhaps most horrifying of all, a woman's suit, stitched together from the skin of corpses, carefully crafted so Gein could wear it and, in his words, become his mother. The official count stood at 2 confirmed murders, Bernice Wardens and tavern owner Mary Hogan. But police also discovered body parts from at least 10 different women, all allegedly stolen from local graveyards. Gein admitted to grave robbing, claiming he dug up bodies resembling his mother, Augusta, and used their skin and bones to fashion trophies. However, something never sat right with investigators. The decomposition of certain remains didn't match the timeline of cemetery thefts. Some remains showed signs of trauma inconsistent with post-mortem handling. And despite exhaustive searches, not all the body parts could be matched with known graves. Still, the investigation came to a quiet end. Gein was declared mentally unfit to stand trial and was committed to a psychiatric hospital. His farm, considered too grotesque to preserve, was set ablaze under mysterious circumstances shortly after his arrest. The physical evidence was gone, and the town seemed eager to put the nightmare behind it. No one wanted Plainfield to be remembered for its monster. Yet despite the eagerness to close the book, questions lingered. How could a man with no formal training in anatomy create such precise crafts using human remains? Why were some of the discovered bones so small, almost childlike? Why did several locals quietly share stories of missing persons never investigated, drifters, housemaids, or even local teens last seen near the Gain property? For every confirmed act, there appeared to be a dozen unanswered questions that authorities preferred to keep buried. The legend of Ed Gain soon outgrew the facts. Hollywood turned him into Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. But beneath the cultural exaggeration was a chilling truth. Plainfield may have only seen the surface of Gain's madness. The deeper rot, the crimes never confessed, the lives never accounted for, remained in shadow. Over the years, new theories emerged. Some investigators speculated Gain might have murdered several more people whose bodies were never found. Others believed that he created burial mounds in remote corners of his property, areas never fully excavated. There were even whispers that his mother, Augusta, may have known about his behavior long before her death, and possibly even encouraged it under the guise of religious obsession. As decades passed, amateur sleuths and true crime enthusiasts grew fascinated with the gaps in the case. Soil samples from satellite images revealed large disturbed patches of ground behind the old farmstead. A few curious minds attempted to visit the property, now overgrown and privately owned, only to be chased off or report strange sensations, like being watched or hearing muffled noises underground. It became clear that the official story of Ed Gain was only a fraction of the full horror. The remains that were catalogued never added up. The timelines were inconsistent, and the townspeople, even those who had long since moved away, refused to speak of certain disappearances from the 1940s and 1950s. The atmosphere around Plainfield remained tense, as though something unspeakable still lingered in the air. With Gain dead since 1984, buried in an unmarked grave after his headstone was repeatedly vandalized, the secrets he carried died with him, or so it was believed. But Plainfield's silence may not mean peace. For those willing to look deeper, beneath the surface, the traces of lost souls and unfound remains suggest a darker truth, that the butcher of Plainfield left more than just horror in his wake. He left unfinished business. And for those bold enough to trespass into the past, into the rotted foundations of Gain's forgotten home, there are still whispers that the bodies were never all found, because some of them were never really dead. The twisted legacy of Ed Gain is often overshadowed by the grotesque artifacts he left behind. Skin masks, dismembered torsos, and morbid decorations became the focal points of a media frenzy, but very little attention was given to the land beneath his home, the barren, overgrown soil that once surrounded the infamous farmhouse. And yet, it's in that very soil where the most disturbing mysteries still lie, untouched by court records and forgotten by time. During the initial investigation in 1957, law enforcement focused primarily on what was inside the house. The bodies of Bernice Wardens and Mary Hogan provided a clear criminal case, and the dismembered remains found throughout the house were largely assumed to be grave-robbed. But when investigators searched the land surrounding Gain's property, they were stunned by its condition. Massive sections of earth had been freshly turned, yet no official dig took place to determine why. The ground was frozen that November, making a full excavation nearly impossible without heavy equipment local police lacked and never requested. Some areas appeared to have been carefully backfilled. Soft mounds marked seemingly random spots across the 160-acre farm. Several officers recalled seeing piles of small animal bones and discarded clothing in an old well, though it was never fully drained. At the time, with Gain in custody and the public outraged, authorities seemed more focused on putting a quick end to the investigation than fully understanding what they'd uncovered. The deeper they looked, the darker it got, and some believed there were things better left alone. Years later, former lawmen who had worked the case admitted they felt pressure to close the investigation quickly. Rumors spread that some officers had stumbled upon smaller skeletons or fragments inconsistent with adult bodies, but these were never entered into evidence. The fear wasn't just about Gain, it was about what might be revealed if the investigation continued. There was a growing suspicion that Gain had been active far longer than he claimed, and that some of his victims may have been people the town itself failed to protect. Missing persons reports from the surrounding counties between 1940 and 1957 tell a disturbing story. Several drifters, a young waitress, and even 2 farmhands reportedly vanished during that time, all with vague or conflicting witness accounts. Most were never reported to local authorities, especially if they were transient or from troubled backgrounds. In rural communities like Plainfield, people came and went frequently. Gaines' isolated farm was the perfect place for someone to disappear without a trace, especially if the perpetrator knew how to bury his secrets, literally. Some theorists argue that Gaines' obsession with death went far beyond exhuming corpses. His detailed knowledge of decomposition, tanning, and skin preservation couldn't have come from casual grave robbing alone. To prepare human remains the way he did, with stretched skin intact and facial features preserved, he would have needed access to fresher bodies. In one grisly discovery, a pair of lips were found sealed in a plastic bag inside his home. Forensic scientists later noted that the tissue was unusually well preserved, suggesting they had been removed from a living or recently deceased person, not a decayed corpse. Equally disturbing is the question of the basement. Unlike the cluttered house above, Gaines' cellar remained largely unexplored due to water damage and structural collapse. Some officers described a strange smell and oppressive heat when they entered. Others believed that Gaines may have kept victims alive down there, if only for a short time. No formal investigation of the basement took place, and when the house was mysteriously burned down in 1958, whatever secrets lay beneath the floor were lost forever. But decades later, new interest in the property has emerged. Paranormal researchers, urban explorers, and amateur true crime investigators have revisited the site. Some claim to have found small bone fragments in nearby woods. Others report electronic interference, strange sounds, or even the feeling of being watched. A few have gone as far as to suggest that the spirits of Gaines' unknown victims remain tethered to the land, restless and unnamed, buried without identity or peace. What's more unsettling is the growing belief that Gaines may have had help, or at least, passive enablers. Several locals admitted seeing young women and children near the Gaines farm prior to 1957, despite the man's reputation as a loner. Yet no one thought to question their presence. In small towns, people often mind their own business. In this case, that silence may have allowed a serial killer to operate for years in plain sight, hiding corpses not just in his home, but across a wide swath of forgotten farmland. To this day, the soil of Plainfield remains untouched by any official excavation. Environmental restrictions and private ownership have shielded the land from scrutiny. But for those who believe that Ed Gaines' story was never fully told, it's the earth beneath the ruins that holds the final chapter. Unmarked graves. Scattered remains. Silent screams beneath the roots of trees that have grown over a history of horror. The real tally of Gaines' victims may never be known, but one truth remains. The ground around that farmhouse was never just dirt, it was a mass grave disguised by rural silence and forgotten sins. The story of Ed Gaines' crimes is often told through the lens of his 2 confirmed murders and the macabre artifacts discovered in his farmhouse, but an unsettling undercurrent suggests a much darker and more extensive series of offenses, victims who remain unaccounted for, their fates buried in silence and mystery. These lost victims are not just ghosts of the past, they are the shadows that continue to haunt Plainfield and anyone who dares to dig deeper. The most immediate puzzle lies in the disparity between the number of remains found at Gaines' farm and the officially confirmed victims. When police searched the farmhouse, they found body parts from multiple individuals, far beyond the 2 women known to have been murdered. Experts identified at least 10 different women represented in the bones and skin fragments, some of whom were never reported missing or whose disappearances were never linked to Gaines. The existence of these unconfirmed victims raises chilling questions. Who were these women? How did they come to Gaines' farm? And why were their disappearances overlooked or ignored by law enforcement and the community? These questions point to a disturbing reality. Some victims were likely marginalized women, transient workers, or those who slipped through the cracks of a rural justice system that often neglected the vulnerable. Adding to the mystery are witness accounts from the years leading up to Gaines' arrest. Several locals recalled seeing strange visitors to the farm, young women who never stayed long and seemed uneasy. Some remembered hearing cries in the night or spotting Gaines' truck near isolated areas where bodies were later rumored to have been buried. Others spoke of an eerie presence that seemed to linger around the property, a feeling of being watched or followed. Despite these accounts, the investigation into missing persons during that era was fragmented and incomplete. Many disappearances went unreported, especially among transient populations. In the post-war period, small towns like Plainfield often lacked the resources and communication networks to track these cases thoroughly. This institutional neglect may have allowed Gaines to continue his crimes unnoticed for years, exploiting a community unwilling or unable to confront the growing horror. Another unsettling detail lies in Gaint's psychological profile. Diagnosed with schizophrenia and psychosis, he was clearly deeply disturbed, but experts believe his violence was not random. Instead, it was driven by a compulsive desire to recreate his deceased mother's presence through the use of human skin and bones. This obsession may have led him to select victims who resembled her or who fit the profile of women he encountered in the community. Gaint's methodical collection and preservation of body parts suggest premeditation and an understanding of anatomy that went beyond simple grave robbing. Some forensic experts believe he must have acquired some victims alive, or shortly after death, to achieve the state of preservation seen in his suits and artifacts. This raises the possibility of undiscovered murders, victims who never made it into police records. Even more disturbing are reports that surfaced years after Gaint's death, alleging that he spoke cryptically about others who helped him or knew about his activities. Some townsfolk suspected that Gaint's mother was complicit in some way, given her strict and controlling influence over her son's early life. There were whispers of a cult-like household, where twisted rituals and dark secrets shaped Gaint's descent into madness. While no concrete evidence supports these claims, the rumors added to the aura of fear and suspicion surrounding Plainfield. The unanswered questions about Gaint's lost victims fuel ongoing fascination among true crime enthusiasts and paranormal investigators alike. Theories abound, from secret tunnels beneath the farm to hidden burial pits long forgotten beneath layers of earth and overgrowth. Some even speculate that not all bodies were human, suggesting a more sinister, supernatural explanation for the disappearance of individuals in the area. The farm itself has become a locus of eerie tales and ghost stories. Visitors report strange noises, fleeting shadows, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Local legends claim that the spirits of Gaint's victims wander the property, unable to find peace because their deaths were never acknowledged or their bodies never properly buried. These tales, while unprovable, add another layer of complexity to a case already steeped in horror. More pragmatic investigations have tried to use modern technology to uncover the truth. Ground-penetrating radar surveys, soil analysis, and remote sensing have been proposed by amateur archaeologists and paranormal researchers. However, legal restrictions and private ownership of the land have limited any official exploration. Without access to thorough excavations, many of the most pressing questions remain speculative. The community of Plainfield itself is deeply divided. Some residents prefer to forget the past, eager to move on from the stain of Gaint's legacy. Others feel that acknowledging the lost victims is a necessary step toward healing and remembrance. The tension between silence and remembrance reflects a broader societal struggle. How do communities confront unspeakable horrors while honoring those who suffered in silence? At its core, the story of Ed Gaint's lost victims is a reminder of how easily people can be erased, forgotten not only by their killers but by society itself. It challenges us to look beyond the sensational headlines and consider the lives behind the statistics, the humanity behind the horror. The truth about how many victims Ed Gain claimed, how many were buried in shallow graves, and how many disappeared without a trace may never be fully known. But the shadows they cast continue to shape the narrative of one of America's most notorious killers, reminding us that some horrors lie not just in what is discovered, but in what remains hidden. The farmhouse itself, once a modest rural home nestled amid the woods of Plainfield, has become emblematic of the dark secrets buried beneath its weathered floors and cracked walls. When authorities finally gained access to the property, they were unprepared for the grotesque tableau awaiting them inside. Beyond the confirmed murders, the environment within the house suggested a far more disturbing narrative, one where human remains were repurposed and displayed, where death and obsession had fused into a nightmarish shrine. The sheer quantity and variety of artifacts made from human body parts stunned investigators and the public alike. Skulls fashioned into lampshades, skin stretched and cured into garments, and bones turned into furniture spoke to a mind obsessed with possession and transformation. Each piece seemed to echo a ritualistic intent, a desperate attempt by Ed Gain to reconstruct a lost identity or conjure a presence long gone. The chilling craftsmanship raised unsettling questions about how many victims' remains had been exhumed or murdered to create such a morbid collection. The house's layout itself seemed to have been altered or manipulated in ways that blurred the line between practical dwelling and macabre workshop. Police reports noted strange modifications: hidden compartments behind walls, subfloor areas filled with disturbed earth, and sealed-off rooms that had not been used for decades. Such features suggested a systematic concealment of gruesome activities and materials, providing ample opportunity for Gain to operate undetected for years. Adding to the mystery was the presence of cryptic writings and symbols scrawled across some surfaces, which investigators later interpreted as expressions of Gain's fractured mental state and possible occult interests. These markings did not correspond to any known religious system but appeared to be personalized codes or prayers, possibly aimed at summoning or appeasing dark forces. This hinted at a deeper psychological and spiritual turmoil driving the crimes, a collision of mental illness and supernatural fear. The local landscape also played a critical role in the mystery. The dense woods surrounding the farmhouse provided natural cover and a seemingly endless space to hide evidence. Neighbors reported odd smells emanating from the property at times, descriptions ranging from the metallic tang of blood to the sickly sweet odor of decay. These odors would drift through the air for days, unnoticed or unreported until curiosity, or fear, compelled someone to look closer. Rumors spread that beneath the farmhouse, within the crawlspaces and perhaps deeper in underground pits, lay the remains of those never identified or accounted for. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted unofficially by urban explorers and paranormal enthusiasts have hinted at anomalies beneath the soil, disturbed earth patterns consistent with shallow graves. While none of these investigations have been sanctioned by authorities, they fuel the possibility that the full extent of Gain's crimes has yet to be uncovered. This potential for undiscovered remains gives the farmhouse a spectral quality, as if the house itself were a living entity holding onto secrets, refusing to relinquish them. Stories persist that late at night, soft scratching or scraping sounds emanate from beneath the floorboards, as if something trapped or restless seeks escape or recognition. Although such accounts remain anecdotal and unverifiable, they contribute to the house's reputation as a place steeped in unresolved horror. The media attention following the discovery of the farmhouse's horrors forever changed Plainfield's image. Tourists and thrill-seekers began descending on the area, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous site. Some sought paranormal experiences. Others were drawn by the true crime fascination. Locals grew resentful of the morbid curiosity, viewing it as an intrusion on their community and a painful reminder of trauma. Property owners, wary of trespassers and vandals, took measures to secure the land, but the allure remained strong. Moreover, the farmhouse's notoriety influenced popular culture, inspiring films, books, and documentaries that perpetuated and expanded the mythos of Ed Gein and his victims. While these portrayals often dramatize or fictionalize details, they underscore the lasting impact of the house as a symbol of human depravity and psychological disintegration. The site became more than a crime scene. It evolved into a dark icon of horror, a testament to the depths of madness that can lurk behind a seemingly ordinary facade. Despite the decades that have passed, the farmhouse remains a potent reminder that evil can reside not only in people but in places shaped by those people's actions. The peeling wallpaper, creaking floorboards, and empty rooms resonate with a chilling silence that speaks volumes about loss, violence, and forgotten souls. Each corner seems to hold a story, each shadow conceals a secret, and the house itself stands as a tomb for countless untold tragedies. Efforts to preserve or memorialize the site have been complicated. Some advocate for demolition, hoping to erase the physical reminder of the horrors and help the community heal. Others argue for preservation as a historical landmark, a somber warning and educational tool about the dangers of unchecked mental illness and isolation. The debate highlights the tension between remembering and forgetting, confronting and concealing. Whatever its future, the farmhouse remains at the center of the Ed Gein legend. It embodies the unanswered questions about lost victims, the psychological torment of a killer, and the unsettling possibility that beneath its floors lie truths still waiting to emerge. It is a place where horror transcends story and becomes tangible, a site where history, myth, and fear converge in a haunting and unforgettable manner. The question of Ed Gein's true number of victims remains one of the darkest mysteries surrounding his gruesome legacy. While officially linked to 2 confirmed murders, many believe that the full extent of his crimes may never be fully known. The chilling discoveries in his farmhouse hinted at a far more extensive pattern of violence and desecration, raising unsettling possibilities about how many lives he truly destroyed. One of the most compelling arguments for the existence of additional victims lies in the sheer amount of human remains and body parts found in the house and surrounding property. Authorities uncovered bones, skulls, and fragments that did not match the remains of the 2 known victims. Clothing and personal effects that could not be traced to any missing persons suggested that Gein had exhumed or killed others whose identities were lost to time. The lack of missing persons reports or recovered bodies to match these items only deepened the mystery. The rural isolation of Plainfield in the mid-20th century played a significant role in obscuring the truth. The area was sparsely populated, with many people living far apart and limited communication between communities. It was not uncommon for disappearances to go unnoticed or unreported for long periods, especially if the missing individuals were transient workers, drifters, or marginalized members of society. This social isolation provided Gain with both opportunity and cover, allowing him to operate without immediate suspicion. Moreover, the psychological profile of Ed Gain reveals a deeply disturbed individual whose compulsions and rituals suggested an obsession far beyond what the two confirmed murders could explain. His fascination with death, anatomy, and the macabre, evidenced by the meticulous crafting of objects from human remains, implies a long-term, systematic pattern of behavior. This was not the work of a single outburst of violence, but of ongoing activity driven by twisted beliefs and psychosis. The concept of lost victims also aligns with common patterns in serial killers who often underreport or conceal their crimes. Confessions can be partial or incomplete, influenced by mental illness, manipulation, or a desire to maintain control over information. Gain's mental state, compounded by severe social isolation and a traumatic upbringing, likely contributed to a fractured relationship with reality and a skewed perception of his own actions. He may have selectively admitted to certain crimes while withholding others, intentionally or subconsciously. Over the years, investigators, historians, and true crime researchers have revisited the Gain case multiple times, searching for clues in cold files and unexamined evidence. Some have explored burial sites near the farmhouse, uncovering disturbed soil and indications of shallow graves. Others have examined missing persons cases from the era that remain unsolved, searching for potential connections to Gain. Despite these efforts, conclusive evidence linking him to additional murders remains elusive. Urban explorers and paranormal investigators have also contributed to the ongoing fascination with the farmhouse. Their explorations have revealed strange phenomena, unexplained sounds beneath the floorboards, sudden drops in temperature, and eerie feelings of being watched, that some interpret as the restless spirits of Gain's victims. While these accounts lack scientific verification, they reflect the haunting atmosphere surrounding the site and the psychological impact of its history. The cultural impact of Gain's supposed lost victims is evident in the many films, books, and documentaries inspired by his story. These works often expand on the notion of hidden bodies and dark secrets beneath the farmhouse, weaving fictional narratives around the idea of a greater number of victims. While dramatized, such portrayals underscore the public's fascination with the unknown and the urge to uncover or imagine what lies beneath the surface. The uncertainty surrounding the total number of Gain's victims also raises ethical questions about how society remembers and honors those lost. Families of missing persons still seek closure, while communities grapple with the trauma of knowing such evil existed so close to home. The farmhouse stands as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the profound consequences of neglect, abuse, and mental illness left unchecked. Ultimately, the truth about Ed Gain's lost victims may never be fully uncovered. Time, decay, and incomplete records have obscured many details, while the boundaries between fact and legend continue to blur. Yet the possibility of undiscovered victims lingers like a shadow over Plainfield, a chilling testament to the depths of darkness that can hide beneath the quiet surface of everyday life. This unresolved mystery invites reflection on the nature of evil and the limits of human understanding. It challenges investigators, historians, and the public to confront uncomfortable realities and acknowledge that some horrors resist closure. The search for Gain's lost victims is not only a quest for justice, but also a somber reminder of the lives extinguished and the secrets still buried in the earth beneath the farmhouse. The lingering legacy of Ed Gain's crimes extends far beyond the chilling headlines and courtroom drama that captured the nation's attention in the late 1950s. His case remains a touchstone in discussions about criminal psychology, mental illness, and the darkest recesses of human behavior. The farmhouse in Plainfield, with its grotesque trophies and hidden horrors, has become an enduring symbol of how isolation, trauma, and pathology can collide to create unimaginable tragedy. The cultural impact of Gain's story is immense and multifaceted. Beyond inspiring some of the most infamous horror movies, such as Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs, his crimes have influenced countless books, documentaries, and academic studies. These works delve not only into the details of his murders but also explore broader themes such as the nature of evil, the effects of childhood trauma, and the ways in which society grapples with violent aberrance. Gain's upbringing is often examined as a critical factor in understanding his descent into madness. Raised by a domineering and religiously fanatic mother, he grew up isolated from normal social interactions, steeped in puritanical and fear-based teachings about sin, women, and the outside world. This environment, combined with genetic predispositions and mental health issues, created a volatile psychological landscape. The house itself, a physical manifestation of his mind, reflected these fractured elements, both a prison and a shrine to his warped desires. In the decades since his arrest, Gain has become a symbol for the failure of mental health systems to identify and treat extreme cases of psychological disturbance. His diagnosis of schizophrenia and psychosis, alongside documented episodes of social withdrawal and delusional thinking, highlight how untreated mental illness can escalate into violence when combined with environmental factors. The case prompts ongoing debate about prevention, intervention, and the stigmatization of those struggling with mental health issues. The farmhouse, as a location, embodies more than just a crime scene. It is a cultural artifact and a locus of dark tourism. Visitors, whether driven by morbid curiosity, fascination with true crime, or paranormal interest, see it as a site where the boundary between reality and nightmare thins. Despite repeated warnings and legal restrictions, people have attempted to access the property, driven by a desire to confront the evil housed within or to seek some form of closure. This attraction to sites like Gaines' farmhouse speaks to a broader human impulse to understand and contextualize horror. By physically engaging with places associated with violence and madness, people attempt to process fear and mortality. The house serves as a grim reminder that beneath ordinary facades can lurk unspeakable darkness, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about humanity and ourselves. Paranormal folklore has also woven itself into the fabric of the Gain legend. Tales of ghostly apparitions, unexplained noises, and strange sensations have circulated among local residents and visitors alike. Some claim to have heard faint cries or seen shadowy figures moving behind boarded windows. Whether these accounts stem from psychological suggestion, local legend, or genuine phenomena, they have cemented the farmhouse's reputation as a haunted and cursed place. The media's portrayal of Gain and his crimes has not been without controversy. Sensationalism, fictionalization, and the blending of fact with myth have sometimes distorted public perception. While such narratives help keep the story alive in popular culture, they risk overshadowing the human cost, the lives lost, and the families forever impacted. This tension highlights the challenges in balancing entertainment, education, and respect for victims in true crime storytelling. The ethical considerations surrounding the legacy of Ed Gain are complex. On one hand, his story offers valuable insights into the warning signs and consequences of severe mental illness and social isolation. On the other, there is a risk of glorifying or trivializing violence by focusing too heavily on the perpetrator's infamy. Responsible engagement with this history requires sensitivity, empathy, and a commitment to remembering victims alongside the sensational details. Today, the Gain farmhouse stands as both a cautionary tale and a subject of ongoing fascination. Preservationists and historians debate its fate, whether to demolish it to erase painful memories or preserve it as a historical site to educate future generations. Whatever path is chosen, the house remains a powerful symbol of the intersection between human frailty and monstrous acts. In reflecting on Ed Gain's legacy, it becomes clear that his story is not just about one man's crimes, but about the vulnerabilities within society that allowed those crimes to unfold. It is a call to vigilance in mental health care, community awareness, and the importance of compassion. The farmhouse, the lost victims, and the enduring mysteries challenge us to look beyond horror and ask how such darkness might be prevented in the future. The echo of Gain's actions continues to reverberate, reminding us that evil does not arise in a vacuum. It grows in the shadows of neglect, silence, and isolation. The house in Plainfield remains a chilling monument to those shadows, a place where the past's horrors refuse to be forgotten and where the quest for understanding must persist, no matter how unsettling the truths may be. As we close the chapter on the haunting tale of Ed Gain and his lost victims, we are left to grapple with the chilling reality of how darkness can take root in the most unlikely places. His story serves as a stark reminder that beneath ordinary surfaces can lie unimaginable horrors, reminding us to look beyond appearances and to never ignore the warning signs around us. Though decades have passed, the echoes of Gain's crimes continue to ripple through time, inspiring fear, fascination, and reflection. The farmhouse may now be just an empty shell, but the questions remain: how many victims were truly lost to the shadows, and what lessons can we take from this grim history to prevent such tragedy in the future? Thank you for joining us on this unsettling journey into one of America's most notorious cases. If you found this story gripping, unsettling, or thought-provoking, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more deep dives into true crime and horror legends. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the darkest horrors are the ones that hide in plain sight.